All right. Well, hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this Kendall Hunt webinar, Applying Theory to Practice Through Cultural Understanding for Your Classroom. In this presentation, you'll be introduced to cultural and interpersonal dynamics between Latin America and the United States. Before we begin, I'll just go over a few housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded and you will be receiving access in the coming days as well as our presenters' information. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat and Q&A functions, and our presenters will get all questions answered at to introduce our presenters, we have Lisa Kahle-Piasecki, Matthew Bereza, and Dante B. Solano Castro. I will hand it over to you all.
Well, hi, and thank you everyone who's out there attending. My name is Lisa. I am an associate professor of management at Heidelberg University, located in Tiffin, Ohio, where I also serve as the endowed chair for business administration. I currently teach in our MBA program, Leading Change and Innovation and Ethical Communication for Leaders. And in our undergraduate program, I'm predominantly in the human resource and talent development area. My PhD is from the University of Toledo, also located in Ohio. And my research areas are in the cross-cultural collaboration and specifically in the intersection of technology in the workplace. And I've done a lot of work with global teams. Like my co-authors, I also have experience living and working in multiple countries. Of course, one of those is Mexico and in Central America, Costa Rica. And I'll turn this over to Dante.
Good day, everyone. I'm very happy to be here joining this webinar for you all. My name is Dante Benito Castro, and I am a full-time professor at Tec de Monterrey or Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. My courses that I teach mostly revolve around business model innovation, family business, conscious capitalism, and entrepreneurship. And my area in terms of research is precisely entrepreneurship. Also, I would like to mention that I have a PhD from the University of Cantabria, PhD in business management from the University of Cantabria over in Spain, an MBA from Iowa State University, and a bachelor's in economics from Tec de Monterrey here in Mexico. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it to my colleague, Matthew.
And say thank you, Lisa and Bailey and Kendall Hunt for putting this together. What an honor to be here. I have said several times to my co-authors, this feels like a culmination of my life's work in many ways. This book, Common Ground. I am an associate professor of psychology at St. John Fisher University, and I'm serving as the chair of the Division of Behavioral Sciences this year and next. And in my role here, outside of the chair position, I teach specifically in areas that I research. And I have two lines across my time in the academy, and that is in food systems and food models, especially in vulnerable populations such as Spanish-speaking individuals in North America. And the other side is working in historical trauma transmission in Spanish-speaking populations here in the Americas, in Central America, particularly in El Salvador and Honduras, and also in the Basque Country of Spain. I, like Lisa and of course Dante, have experience working and studying and living outside of the United States or my home country, and that very much called to me in a text like this. My hope for this book is that something lends itself to us understanding in the Americas who we are and maybe where we're headed together. So I'm pleased to be here, and it's good to see everybody.
Yeah, I'm just going to briefly talk about what we hope to talk about today, and we don't have a whole lot of time, and so we will give you an introduction to our book's objectives, touch a little bit on the theories of cultural similarities and differences, specifically between the United States and Mexico. We'll talk a little bit about the national culture of Mexico, cultural competence and human resources, food service practices, inclusivity efforts, and a future directions discussion.
So, situating the textbook, I was asked to write the introduction to the textbook, which is chapter 1, and it really is an overview of everything that we have worked on. And I thought, just to situate in 2 minutes or less what this webinar could be about, and all of the topics Lisa just talked about, the interest that Dante is bringing. Common ground, understanding what unifies us. Many of us are probably not expecting to see 2 pictures of corn. Corn on the bottom is, of course, unprocessed, putting up right from the earth, and the picture on top being corn that has been processed. That's from the highlands of El Salvador. And I use this to situate our talk today, because actually corn is it is the metaphor for the Americas. It is one of the things that has kept the Western Hemisphere pumping pre-Columbian, and has kept the economies of the North, Canada, United States, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, all of these economies vibrant today. Is our agriculture as just one of the things that unifies us. It really doesn't matter if we look across all of the topics that Lisa just mentioned. Almost every single one of them we've discovered over writing this book. There is more that unifies us between North, South, or South and North, the islands, Central America, that then de-unifies us. And as I'll talk about later in my chapter, at least, some of the food practices, about the notion that this affects everybody. Many of us, whether we like it or not, and I like it, that we are in it together. And if America stops producing one thing, let's say corn, the world stops eating like it does. So the theme and the spirit, I hope, is that this application of those topics, and how this shows how unified we actually are. But to start out, I'm going to turn it over Lisa, I believe, to start us out with our first talk.
So when in the process of writing this book, all 3 of us certainly have relationships with each other. And when you're building relationships with someone from a different culture, country, it's easy to kind of look at the differences, but we want to really focus on some of those similarities. However, where do you start? So you kind of start with the differences. And so there's some seminal research that we discuss in several chapters in the book. And one of the things specifically with the United States and Mexico that we explore is where each country falls on the cultural dimension of individualism. So individualistic countries such as the United States tend to value more personal goals, self-reliance, self-sufficiency, and countries that score low in this area tend to have more emphasis on common goals. So in thinking about one of the purposes of this book, we were hoping that not only would it be of interest for higher education institutions, but also for those companies that have cross-border operations. And so having an understanding of some of the seminal research that's been done on countries such as the US and Mexico, and then also other Latin American countries, is a starting point for understanding how those kind of national cultural values can actually relate to the workplace in different ways of working, different ways of kind of achieving goals or coming together in teams. So not only did we explore the cultural dimensions that are really seminal to the kind of the study of cross-cultural management, but also we explore a little bit on the Globe Studies, another seminal research project that specifically looked at how these differences in national culture translate into the workplace in terms of leadership and how managers might function differently based on their national culture. So we do explore all the various dimensions, and I'm going to have Dante talk a little bit specifically about Mexico and their national culture in a different dimension.
Thank you, Lisa. And just as Matt and Lisa mentioned, we had fun, I would have to say, in putting together this book. And by fun, I mean that we were discovering so many different angles. And that fun always, it is also associated, in my case, with offering our readers these insights that maybe they didn't know before, both for industries and for academia. So in this case, I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of those dimensions that Lisa previously mentioned, and it's the case of masculinity versus femininity in the case of Mexico. We as authors of this book acknowledge that a number of societies, including Mexico, of course, and the US, have a certain degree of what has been labeled by other authors or a number of others as ostentatious manliness. And I celebrated, when we were putting together this webinar, I celebrated that I would have an opportunity to talk about this specific one, because this is the one that deals in a colloquial word with the term that we know as machismo. And the Latin American machismo or the Mexican machismo has been portrayed in very different ways throughout the years. But it is so surprising that many countries exhibit or have this behavior in their inside their population, especially in their masculine population or men population. This assertive pole, that the assertive pole is associated with the side of men, which is the one that entangles sometimes this desire for autonomy or behaviors as aggressive aggression or exhibition and dominance, whereas the other pole, which is the female pole, it's associated with nurturing accompanied by affiliation, helpfulness, and humility. Again, this is the stereotypes that's been depicted by many others before, many other authors before us. So this idea of keeping or increasing social status and minding for appearances is the way we observe this behavior in societies, especially in men. This is a case of Mexico. This is a case in Mexico, of course. But for some people, it comes with a certain degree of surprise that to see that both Mexico and the US rank above this average. I mean, the average in this particular dimension, in this cultural dimension. So, in the case of Mexico, just briefly reading what we have here for you today, Mexico tends to be more masculine-oriented culture, and it scores around 69 in that ranking created by Gerd Hofstede and other authors. There is a strong emphasis on competition, achievement, and success. Material rewards and visible status symbols are highly appreciated. Gender roles are more distinctly defined with expectations of this so-called male assertiveness. Work is often prioritized over personal life and leisure, and success is measured by economic performance and winning. So just to wrap it up in this slide, it is a behavior that is highly observable in Mexico still, even though we have moved towards more egalitarian societies, which is the case of Mexico, of course, but especially in rural areas, I would say it's still very, very visible. But at this point, I will turn it over again to Lisa to continue with our presentation.
So there is a chapter focused on human resource management and the practices and the various, again, differences that exist specifically within the United States and Mexico. And why this chapter is important outside of the kind of practical information that someone might need to know if they are going abroad to work or working with a global team, is really having this understanding that each country, of course, is not the same, and the various employment laws that govern practices in the workplace can be very different. And one of the things, of course, we know with the changing in society, with the rapid digitalization and fourth industrial revolution kind of tools that are associated with that, is the chances for someone to be able to work with teammates on a project and work that are coming from different cultures is really great. And in a sense that it's more likely today and in the future than it was in the past. So we're operating in a diverse workplace. And so kind of trying to develop these global competencies can be difficult without having an international experience. So in our chapter in human resources, there is that practical information, things that are different, such as holidays. You know, of course, they're not the same, but if you haven't gone to that country, it might just not really dawn on you that maybe, you know, half of your global team is not working that day because that is a significant holiday for that country. So we explore the various issues that exist kind of in an organization, because again, if someone were going abroad or if someone is working with someone in a different country, having some of these basic understandings can help build those relationships that we all know. That's what makes work so valuable. It's the people that we work with. And this could kind of avert some of the complications that can arise without having that knowledge. And now I'll turn it back to Matt.
Yep. And as I had mentioned earlier in the introduction, my chapters, besides the introduction of the textbook, were on food service, food models, food practices, and also otherness in the Americas. And again, I've researched for years in food models, especially cross-cultural models. And something that was incredibly important to me and also became highlighted in the textbook was how our food system in the Americas, first of all, as I had mentioned, feeds the world. So the United States alone ranks in the top 3 of 10 out of 21 commodities, food commodities. If we add Brazil, Argentina, Mexico into the mix, even the islands, for some of the products out of the islands, we probably would near almost top 3 in the vast majority of the commodities again. And so our contribution, while largely today is largely modern, is not altogether modern. And it also has very interesting roots in colonialism. Many people in the North are taught that the West was discovered, or that the West began in, or America began in 1776, which of course is a very British colonial date. But once you start moving outside of just a small pocket in the Northeast of the United States, many of us understand that truly we came together in 1492 with the encounter between the European, the Native, and the African. And whatever that has created, we are still here. And somehow we are all tied by that date and those lessons that came. And so today we can still see that the incredibly large organizations that govern so many of our precious things, like, let's say, corn, are protected by the state. Perhaps just as they were back in Potosi when they were pulling silver out of the mine in 1521. That's just a supposition. I'm just wondering here. But our foundations are historical, and they go right back to the day that we all did come together. Well, fast forward to today, our food service models are incredibly impactful with the North American GDP. 6% of our GDP is just buying food at a restaurant alone. Mexico is at 4.6%. So we can see just even buying our lunch is an incredible contribution to the world holding of capital. We also are now in what we can consider, I suppose, a post-NAFTA North American Free Trade Agreement society, and we are now governed economically under the United States and Mexico-Canada agreement of 2020, and the USMCA attempted to maybe bring some of the critiques of NAFTA into line. Unfortunately, it was largely written in the North, and it has incredibly strict regulations, unsustainable structures for very small producers. And as a result of all of that, we're seeing that our food service, our food models, and our practices are continuing to be incredibly centralized on mega corporations, transnational corporations, and a few producers. As Dante, Lisa, and I were talking the other day, Mexico has one of the oldest corn cultures on the planet, maybe 30,000 years of producing their own corn. And yet today they have to import, under the agreement, corn from the north to eat in the south. And that is unsure if that's sustainable. But our culture is our cultures today. We do this from Canada, North America, Central and South America. Modern, very scientific-based food service models and practices. And we have a few remaining alternatives. For example, the milpa, which is a Mayan paradigm from Chiapas in the south of Mexico, where people are attempting to go back to this restorative practice of growing together, growing beans, squash, corn together, not breaking the soil, the reduction of polluting materials in either pesticides or herbicides or fertilizers themselves. So just a brief introduction on why our food systems, even today in the Americas, still center on these mega corporations and transnationals. Now, the next thing, and the last before we get into future directions, is otherness in America. And this is a very peculiar part of our book, because everything that Lisa, Dante, and myself have been speaking about in the Americas is almost exclusively covered by some of our foundational laws protecting those of us living with a disability in the West. It is not the case around the world. So in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the re-up of that later on in the decade guaranteed that there were certain protections. Similarly, the 2005 General Law for People with Disabilities in Mexico set the pace and a benchmark for other organizations and agencies to meet. It was no longer okay in our sphere of the hemisphere to say, well, that's how they are and could live in a different facility and away from society. This was very integrative and bringing people into society. And it produced some of our most interesting movements and civil rights movements in the hemisphere. There is a lot of work to be done with the idea of who is able-bodied, and how we define ourselves in this population. Is it a culture? Is disability really the natural state of a human body? And so when we talk about human resources or cultural competencies or work in the Americas producing food, are we thinking about them as everybody having an able body, Or are we thinking about them as humans who do break down, or who are broken down and have a very few short years of able work years? Well, whatever is happening, about 15% of the world lives with a disability. However, their standard of living is 50 to 75% harder or worse off than comparisons. So if you are not disabled, you are gaining an extra 3 paychecks for waking up, as one theoretician put it. Also, 80% of people living with disabilities are in the developed world. Now, mathematically, as 177 countries have laws protecting those with disabilities, it doesn't make any mathematical or logical sense that 80% live in the developed world alone. And we believe that, of course, that's not true. It's just that we have a mechanism and the resources to count them. Of course, other places can count, but are they gathering the data on them and how people with disabilities, how vulnerable they are in our world? And so I was, again, very grateful to be a part of this chapter because it is an umbrella. 15% of anything we're talking about are people with a disability and have, of course, need accommodations to succeed. But I know now we have a couple of slides on future directions and some discussion on where we might be going.
And building precisely on that, Matt's comment on there is a lot of work to be done. We are wrapping up this presentation with a series of future directions. And in this very slide, you are seeing one of them by the name of cooperative learning. This is one of the future directions that we have found as an interesting one through our work on Common Ground. And this particular future direction delves into education/learning processes. This particular one attempts to provoke a shift in the way we see competition versus collaboration in the classrooms. As a definition for this future direction, you can see that we label it as moving away from competitive educational models towards more collaborative approaches. We found that we might have common ground strategic proposals. I mean, as defined by needs in both countries, both in or in a series of countries in the global South, in Latin America, and also in the US. So the strategic proposals are around redesigning the curriculum to include more group projects and peer-to-peer learning, and training teachers in facilitating collaborative learning environments. Now, in terms of country-specific strategic challenges derived from this particular future direction, we could mention that in the case of Mexico, for example, it could be to pilot cooperative learning methods in urban schools before expanding nationwide. That would be one of those challenges, starting first in these areas and then little by little going abroad, into a broader scale. And in the case of the US, it could be the specific strategic challenge could be to leverage existing educational reform movements to incorporate more collaborative approaches. So we have a mixture of these future directions, and we will be able to see them in the next slide. We have a mixture of them, so both industry and academic interest may jump on them from different perspectives. So just to take a look at the general future directions that we have created after this work on Common Ground, which, as I mentioned before, it was an intellectual adventure that made me discover so many different angles from Lisa's chapters, from Matt's chapters, that I wasn't aware of them. So that's why it was intellectually fun. So just to mention these ones, future directions, we have ideas on gender equality in the workplace, work-life balance, emotional expression, domestic violence, LGBTQ plus rights and acceptance, mental health awareness, paternal involvement, redefining success, and conflict resolution. We see this series of future directions as directions that also involve taking into account what newer generations are behaving in comparison to previous generations. The workplace is a mixture of generations. You could easily see even 4 different generations and behaviors inside an organization. And many of these future directions address these differences that haven't been addressed before. So with this, I will wrap it up for this slide and take the mic back to Lisa.
Hey, I think Bailey is going to help us monitor questions in the chat.
Yep, yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat or using the Q&A functions. I do have one here asking what type of ancillaries come with the book.
So we will have PowerPoints for each chapter and then also a test bank for each chapter. Each chapter also has within it some web activities, reflection questions, and reflection activities. So we really built it so that each chapter, if you wanted to use them independently, you could, but that it would have all of the kind of usual materials that someone in the classroom would need and expect.
And then another one here is what interactive components does this book have that students benefit from in the classroom?
I'll just jump in. I'm sure the others have an idea as well, but I think the case studies are very helpful. They are relevant. So they have most of our case studies either were worked on by ourselves firsthand and within the last several years. And that's true, at least in my case. So these data are coming right up, even though we are changing fast in the Americas. The case studies are incredibly relevant to me and into my classroom.
And I'll just add to that, there are multiple businesses and companies with a focus in the various chapters. So it would provide a basis for an instructor to use that as well and expand on it if that was something they chose to do.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. And as a reminder, the webinar is recorded, so you will be receiving a recording of the webinar sent to you in the coming days. And we'll also provide you all with a link to the product page if you are interested in reviewing a faculty copy. Thank you everyone and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey, Dante, Lisa, and everybody who attended.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Bailey. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.